Hi everyone, my name's Lorenn Ruster.
And I'm Thea Snow, and we're recording this talk on the Wurundjeri land of the Kulin Nation, which is also known as Melbourne, Australia. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging.
We're really excited to be here and we look forward to sharing our recent work exploring the role of dignity in government AI ethics instruments.
The future doesn't just happen, we create it. And this is certainly true when it comes to new technologies. Humans actively shape the way that technologies are designed and implemented, and in turn, new technologies shape how we are as humans. Arguably, many technologies that we're seeing emerge today are not embodying a future that we collectively want. There are many instances of new technologies that deepen inequality, that replicate and amplify discrimination, and some which even undermine democracy. What we want is clearly something different. Amongst a range of things, we believe that we need new technologies that protect and promote our human dignity, technologies that support people to live dignified lives. And because I work at the Centre for Public Impact, where our vision is to reimagine government, I was really interested in exploring what role does government have to play as part of this conversation. And it's from these observations that we came up with our research question, which was this: to what extent do government AI ethics instruments work to both protect and proactively promote human dignity, people's dignity? By AI ethics instruments, what we mean are the principles, frameworks, directives, and other guiding tools that governments use to create rules and guardrails around how AI ethics tools can be designed, implemented, procured, and applied, both within and beyond the public sector. AI ethics as a discipline has gone through a number of waves, and this is taken from Carly Kine's article. The first wave was led by philosophers and is really about principles. The second wave was led by computer scientists and focuses on technical fixes. The third wave was about socio-technical systems and had as an underpinning value the value of justice. And we believe that a new wave of ethical AI could be centred around the value of dignity.
To unpack this further, we needed a working understanding of what dignity is. And to do that, we looked at a range of different resources from philosophy and medicine to human rights and theology. And from looking at some of these different models of dignity, we've combined Dr. Donna Hicks's dignity model from the international conflict resolution space with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, as well as explorations of dignity from the Ethics Centre to come up with the following working definition of dignity. So the main part we want to highlight here is the bit in the middle around dignity being a desire to be seen, heard, listened to, and treated fairly, to be recognised, understood, and to feel safe in the world. And we also, to make this more pragmatic, we adopted Dr. Hicks's 10 essential elements of dignity. And these are elements that try to operationalize what dignity looks and feels like. So you can see things around acceptance of identity, safety, which refers to psychological safety as well as physical safety, or things like accountability and fairness. So this working definition was great, but it didn't really get to our question of what are the different types of roles that a government could play in relation to dignity. And to understand that, we had to further unpack what dignity means. And so we used Dr. Hicks's book and we undertook a discourse analysis of how dignity is being used, what adjectives, what verbs are being used in conjunction with dignity. And we came up with 5 categories of how it's being used. Firstly, around violating dignity. Secondly, around preventing from dignity violation. Thirdly, around remedying when dignity violation occurs. Fourthly, around promoting the embodiment of dignity. And finally, around acknowledging the existence of dignity. And from this analysis, we devised our own conceptualization of dignity as an ecosystem.
So here you can see our dignity ecosystem diagram, and there are a few things to point out. The first is that dignity is an ecosystem. It's dynamic, it's alive, and it needs to be constantly recalibrated and nurtured. It's not a static thing. The second thing to point out is that the the ecosystem is supported by both protective and proactive mechanisms, and those are the things that need to be kept in balance. Protective mechanisms are those that prevent and remedy dignity violations, and proactive mechanisms are those that actively promote human dignity. Thirdly, as you can see underneath, we believe that the role of government is to enable a balanced dignity ecosystem. This means ensuring that there are both protective and proactive mechanisms working in harmony with one another.
So from here, we turn this dignity ecosystem into a dignity lens. And this is what we used, a tool we used to apply this dignity framing across government AI ethics instruments. And we looked at the instruments of Australia, UK, and Canada. And you can find this dignity lens in our report if you want to apply it to your own work. So we went through each instrument, we understood the types of mechanisms that are present in these instruments, and we mapped them to an essential element of dignity and a dignity role. So for example, with acceptance of identity, this element is all about how you can give people the freedom to express their authentic selves without fear of judgment or retribution or bias and prejudice. This dignity element can be pursued through protective ways and through proactive ways. So in terms of a protective role, freedom to be who you are is protected through anti-discrimination laws. So a role of government can be to ensure compliance to those anti-discrimination laws. In terms of proactive roles, freedom to be who you are can be promoted through consultation with affected populations or through the involvement of diverse expertise. And so each dignity element can be expressed through protective and or proactive ways. And we comb through each instrument to map the mechanisms to the elements of dignity and to the potential roles.
So what did we find? Firstly, we found, to our surprise, that there is a lack of explicit reference to the word dignity in these instruments. The Australian and Canadian instruments don't use the word dignity at all, and the UK instrument only mentioned it once under the principle of fairness. This was quite surprising, given that dignity is part of these countries' commitments through multilateral agreements, such as the G20 AI principles, and also through codes of conduct and fundamental national values that do explicitly use the word dignity. What we also found, however, is that even though the word dignity isn't used, a lot of the elements which Lorenn talked to before and which we drew from Donna Hick's work are present. But what we find in relation to those elements is that the ecosystem is out of balance. Governments are much more focused on playing protective roles, in other words, preventing or remedying dignity violations, than they are in thinking about how to promote people's dignity through new technologies.
So following this, we sat back and we asked why. Like, why is there an emphasis on protective roles? Why is there a relative absence on proactively promoting dignity? And what we've observed is that the meaning of ethics has been oversimplified when it comes to AI and government. We traditionally have thought of ethics as not about compliance or fixed sets of rules, but actually about human flourishing, and dignity is a core part of that. And somehow the full meaning of ethics has been lost, and this is reflected in this overemphasis on protective roles. On a more practical level, these proactive roles seem sort of less concrete, and it is a different mindset between protective and proactive approaches. A protective mindset is all about managing to a minimum standard, whereas a proactive mindset doesn't mean that you're trying to manage to or comply to a predefined basic limit. You're actually trying to optimize a limitless upside. And in a world where you have cost and speed and a convenience culture, protective roles fit in quite nicely with that type of culture, whereas proactive roles might seem a bit superfluous or not our role and difficult to define in action. In the report, we firmly disagree with this idea that proactive roles can't be concrete, and we outline 3 examples of how they can be really concrete. One example that we wanted to consider for a moment is an AI-enabled device for someone living with dementia that reminds them, say, to take their medication. A protective approach to dignity could lead to questions around how to minimize the impacts of data or privacy breaches. And this is an important set of considerations. Dignity promotion mechanisms can be equally as concrete. So In this case, the dignity elements of acknowledgement, inclusion, these sorts of things could materialize through personalized design, like a greeting in their own language, or using reminder sounds and images that are familiar to them to create a sense of psychological safety. In order to pursue dignity through this technology, a balance of both protective and proactive measures is needed.
So what do we do about this imbalance? We really feel that we're just scratching the surface, and we're so excited to be part of this conversation today, because what we want to be doing is testing how these ideas resonate with people both within and beyond government. So the first thing that we'd encourage is for people to use our dignity lens, to start thinking about, in your context, how does the dignity ecosystem look? Is it well balanced? Is enough thought being given to how to promote dignity? Or is there that culture that we saw in government around risk aversion and prevention and remedying approaches only? The second thing that we'd like to see is people thinking about how to incorporate proactive roles into already existing mechanisms that you might have. So how might you take something that already exists, like an impact assessment that might only be thinking about risk, and flip that to be thinking about an impact assessment that's thinking about positive impacts that a certain technology might have as well. And finally, we'd love to find collaborators. We're really open to having more conversations about how these ideas and this tool might be relevant for you in your work. So what we've learned from this work is that for governments to support a balanced dignity ecosystem, and probably those beyond governments as well, we need both protection and prevention for dignity violations, but we also need to be seeing that sit hand in hand with dignity promotion. We want to be part of this movement and this conversation, and we hope you'll join us in co-creating a new wave of AI ethics in service of dignity. Thank you.